with the Community Resource Association of a city, where all the different departments of the city came together, and I facilitated a day with them where they could develop the future agenda of the city and how the budgets would be laid out and so on. In terms of initiative, used to be corporate funded and founded, and now much more involvement of citizens and users, as was the case with that CRA facilitation. And then some of the characteristics that used to happen were citizens and users weren't even involved in the process or asked about the process, but there was an effort to build a win-win situation. And now citizen participation and co-creation and orchestration is actually part of the original remit and how the whole orchestration is set up. So that's pretty key and quite different. Now, there's a distinction that's popped up over the years. There's a whole process put forth by the IDEO or IDEO people out in California that they trademark the concept of design thinking. That always made me mad, because when I lived in England for 12 years and worked with Dr. Edward de Bono, who was definitely a thought leader in the lateral thinking, creativity, innovation space, we used to use the concept design thinking to mean something different than what was trademarked by the IDEO people, and we had to stop using the term. And as it was, design thinking became a kind of formulaic, very left-brain logical approach, although they did start by being empathetic with the customer in terms of what they wanted to create or have happen in their organization. So, it started with empathy, but frankly, the whole process was very formulaic and based on logic. And over the years, many people began to sort of sense or feel that the sort of creative juice was squeezed out of that innovation process. So, as often is the case, somebody came up with a new concept and wrote the book about it. And we are going to reference Amy Whitaker, who came up with a book called Art Thinking: How to Carve Out Creative Space in a World of Schedules, Budgets, and Bosses. And so art thinking is really where you dance with ambiguity and paradox, which are elements involved in creativity, along with a vision that gives you a direction and a trajectory for your activities. So this is actually part of that Eastern thinking, the art thinking, along with the Western scientific approach of design thinking that's now creeping up in the world. So, as I mentioned, the new trend with business models is a hybrid both of economic and social concerns that have evolved through the past decades from the 1980s with the stakeholder model, stakeholder management. Now, stakeholders include not just the shareholders, people who own shares in the company, but also the customers or end users and also the employees and the staff. So there was the first recognition in the 80s of that. Then it moved in the early 2000s to corporate social responsibility. Then the 2010s or so, they began talking in the literature about creating shared value and about a conscious business, and the term about building a great company, which has morphed now into this sort of Eastern-Western model of sustainable enterprise. And there are examples, as I mentioned, in different countries, like Patagonia would be a company in the U.S. that people recognize as being this type of organization. There's a company in the U.K. called Lush, L-U-S-H. And then there's a Japanese organic towel company called Ikeuchi Organic. And that's also leading the charge there. Now, their focus is on doing no harm, socially acceptable, even if not actually solving problems or social issues per se. So when that started happening, where they would say, fine, we're creating new products and services that do no harm, they're good and they do no harm, but they're not really solving an issue. there came up a need then for what they're calling business philosophy. And that led into the adoption in organizations led by groups like Google, frankly, of taking yoga into the organization, bringing in meditation, bringing in the whole concept of mindfulness, all of these things as tools for managing creativity and innovation on a personal level, and in order to gain more, productivity out of the employees there on the staff. And the point of view then using yoga, meditation, mindfulness kinds of things is that you have a more comprehensive, like a bird's eye point of view. So you're not just siloed into your department and your project. You strip down the layers, taking a more simple approach, the approach of simplicity, and you allow for ambiguity and paradox, which, as I mentioned earlier, is key to creativity. So really, artful thinking is about the awareness of the invisible elements, the things that haven't yet been identified, and if you see Asian paintings, I used to do brush painting when I was an exchange student in Korea, and the white space was just as important as the black ink we made into reeds or flowers or mountains on the page. And the thing is, if you can allow the white space, the invisible, to manifest even in a highly driven, results-oriented organization, then you can unlock more focused creativity and innovation. So really the Western approach separates invention, which is the tangible results and outcomes, from innovation, which is the invisible process that leads to sustainable innovation and creativity, and combine that with the Eastern approach. And so some organizations being led certainly by people in Singapore and even Korea, organizations in both of those countries and their governments, believe it or not, where, for example, for leaders, they're asking for KPIs, which are key performance indicators, that they include traits when they're being evaluated as CEOs or executives of social value-driven innovation. And it's where they're asking their leaders now to combine the intuitive or receptive approach along with the pragmatic, ambitious, or results-driven approach. Even in universities, there are now programs in a number of universities around the world where the curriculum enhances multidisciplinary learning by integrating internships and community service, and also designing a curriculum of programs like design leadership, where they combine design thinking and art thinking and integrate this whole approach into the curriculum and the leadership approach. So I know it's a lot of information here, and what we're really looking at is a shift in the ethos of the corporate world and the young people coming up through the universities and being young leaders, the upstarts in these new organizations with entrepreneurial thinking, with sustainable enterprise, with desire to combine the Eastern philosophy with the Western pragmatism in business. Now, the reality is, this is how I've been teaching the last 20 or 30 years myself. I understand everyone has creative potential, access through their minds and bodies, because they themselves, every human, is a conduit. And then if you leverage that with a toolkit, like the game changer thinking mindsets, thinking, creativity tools, and then learn to become masterful and skillful in how to apply them. And then the projects, products, and services that you create to deliver the results bring you into this enlightened approach that adds value to society while not causing problems. And just to finish off here, I'm going to quote a Korean company, the SK Group, who in 2018 swapped out their company mission which had been maximizing shareholder profit, they switched it to mutual growth and creating happiness for stakeholders, which encompass shareholders, customers, and employees. And that, my friends, is game changer thinking on a large scale. So think about it for yourself. There may be new entrees for you into the new world, either as a volunteer or paid employee, contributor, a way to access your lifetime of knowledge and skills and add value even as we move through life and gain gray hairs. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for joining me. I thank my producer, Emmanuel, and thank you certainly as my listeners, and look forward to speaking with you next week. And meanwhile, check out GameChangerThinking.com, and you can also check the SOB Radio Network under my show, Living Legacy Leadership, and look up the archives and see what else we've talked about in the past couple weeks, months, and years. So with that, I'll sign off and just remind you that the life you live is the legacy you leave. Bye now.